Hello, and welcome to another episode of Weary Rascal Crime and Craft. Today we will be exploring a case with so many twists and turns that it sounds like it came straight out of a Hollywood movie. But before we begin, if you enjoy our content, be sure to subscribe to our channel and give this video a like. Due to the content of this video, viewer discretion is advised. Having said that, let's get started. Elizabeth Betsy Faria lived in Troy, Missouri with her husband Russ Faria, as well as her two daughters from a previous marriage. She was employed at State Farm Insurance and was well liked by her peers. Even though she was diagnosed with breast cancer in 2010, she did not allow it to control her life. In spite of her diagnosis, she was a devoted wife and mother. Although she had the support of her husband and daughters, she also leaned on her friend and coworker Pamela Hupp for support during her battle with cancer. Although she was going to regularly scheduled cancer treatments in October of 2011, Betsy learned that the cancer had spread to her liver and had become terminal. Devastated by this news, she would often confide in her good friend Pamela about how this was affecting her, as well as the troubles she was experiencing in her marriage. Even though Russ seemed like a loving husband on the outside, Pamela would state that Betsy often spoke of Russ's violent temper, his heavy drinking, and threats of abuse. Because of these things, Betsy was seriously considering leaving Russ. In fact, Betsy trusted Pamela Hupp so much that on December 22nd of 2011, Betsy would change the sole beneficiary of her $150,000 life insurance policy from Russ to Pamela, who promised to make sure that the money would be split between Betsy's two daughters when they got older. 5 days later, on December 27th of 2011, Betsy underwent her usual chemotherapy treatments at the Alvin J. Siteman Cancer Center, which is located in St. Louis, Missouri, after which she decided to pay a visit to her mother. She had plans to have Russ pick her up later that evening, or, if it was too late, to just stay at her mother's house that evening. However, a concerned Pamela decided to swing by Betsy's mother's house to pay her a visit and see how her treatments had gone that day. Since she was already in the neighborhood, Betsy would agree to allow Pamela to just give her a ride home instead of having Russ go out of his way to pick her up. Pamela and Betsy arrived at the Faria home at around 7 p.m. After helping Betsy into the house and making sure that she was comfortable on their living room couch, Pamela left her friend's home so that she could get some rest. Meanwhile, Russ was spending time watching movies at his friend Michael Corbin's home. At about 9 p.m., Russ left Michael's home, drove to an Arby's in Lake St. Louis, then made his way home. At 9:41 p.m., 911 would receive a disturbing call. The call came from Russ Faria. He informed the 911 operator that he returned home to discover that his wife Betsy had committed suicide. First responders arrived within 10 minutes and found Betsy's body lying on the living room couch. She had been stabbed over 55 times, and her wrist had been cut to the bone. A serrated knife was found lodged in her neck. When they looked under a pillow, which was on the couch that Betsy had been lying on, they found a second knife. The first responders estimated her time of death at between 7:20 p.m. and 9:41 p.m. that evening. The day after Betsy's death, the police arrested Russ on suspicion of homicide. The idea that Betsy had committed suicide just didn't line up with the evidence found at the crime scene. How could Betsy have stabbed herself 55 times, cut her wrist, and then lodged a knife into her own neck? Seems ludicrous, right? Well, that's the word that the first responders had used to describe this theory. Ludicrous. Upon searching the house, police found a pair of blood-stained slippers in the closet belonging to Russ Faria. The agitated and emotional state that Russ was found in seemed suspicious. Also, Russ had completely failed his polygraph test. Law enforcement had no doubt in their minds that Russ had murdered his wife. Devastated by the loss of her friend, Pamela Hupp agreed to be interviewed by police. She would tell them about Russ's violent temper, drinking problem, and other issues that Betsy had spoken to her about. Pamela would also encourage the police to search Betsy's laptop, where they found a document seemingly written by Betsy detailing her fears that her husband would kill her. On January 4th, 2012, just one day after his wife's funeral, Russ Faria was charged with first-degree murder and armed criminal action in the death of his wife, Betsy Faria. He wasn't able to make a bail, which had been set at $250,000. Thus, he was held in the county jail until his trial, which started on November 18, 2013. During his trial, 4 of Russ's friends would testify that Russ had been with them the evening of Betsy's death. His defense attorney, Joel Schwartz, would argue that, given the evidence, the timeline of events just didn't add up. Russ's cell phone records would show that he was at his friend's house 20 miles away from the crime scene. There was also evidence that Russ had made purchases from different stores over the course of that fateful evening. Also, the lack of blood on Russ's body and his clothes were presented as evidence of his innocence. However, the prosecuting attorney, Leah Askey, would go on to argue that Russ's friends were providing him with a false alibi and had conspired with him to commit the atrocity that befell Betsy that evening. It was argued that Russ's friends had held onto Russ's cell phone and even went so far as to impersonate him when buying food at Arby's to further solidify his alibi. The prosecution also argued that Russ had murdered his wife in a fit of rage after discovering that he was no longer listed as the beneficiary to Betsy's life insurance policy. Based on the evidence, on November 21st of 2013, Russ was convicted on both the first-degree murder charge as well as the armed criminal action charge. 1 month later, he was sentenced to life plus 30 years for the murder of his wife. Although the prosecution argued that Russ's 4 friends were complicit in her murder, no criminal charges were ever brought up against them. In fact, they were unaware of the implications put against them by the prosecuting attorney until they were informed by the media. Although she didn't actually testify at Russ's trial, Betsy's friend Pamela Hupp played a key role in the prosecuting attorney's argument, given his alleged temper and abuse towards Betsy leading up to her death. During the trial, a secret hearing was held where Pamela would reveal that she had put $100,000 into a trust for Betsy's daughters. The sentence was welcomed by Betsy's family. They were relieved to finally have some closure. In an interview, which took place after the trial, Betsy's sister Julie would claim that Russ had, in fact, been angered at his removal from the life insurance policy. She would also claim that, on one occasion, Russ had held a pillow to Betsy's face and said, "This is what it feels like to die." For all intents and purposes, it looked as if justice had been served for Betsy. Now, normally this would be the end of the story, but unfortunately, we're just getting started. In December of 2013, a motion for a new trial was filed by Russ's attorney. However, it was rejected by Judge Christine Minnemeyer. However, it would later be alleged that the prosecuting attorney, Leah Askey, was involved in a romantic relationship with Mike Lang, who was the captain of investigations for the Lincoln County Sheriff's Office at the time of the murder, causing a conflict of interest. Also, the 911 operator who had taken Russ's call would state that Russ did seem genuinely shocked and upset at the time of that call. Based on this information, Russ's attorney, Joel Schwartz, would yet again appeal the conviction. In February of 2015, the Missouri Court of Appeals would send the case back to the 45th Circuit Court for a retrial. After Judge Minnemeyer recused herself from the case, the 22nd Circuit Court Judge Stephen Omer granted a new bench trial based on evidence that had emerged. Russ was subsequently released on bond pending the trial. After a new trial was held and new evidence was brought to light, Russ Faria was acquitted of Betsy's murder on November 7th of 2015. Upon hearing of Russ's acquittal, Pamela Hupp was devastated that her friend's killer was walking free. 2013 had taken a huge toll on Pamela. Not only had she lost her close friend Betsy, she also lost her mother, Shirley Newman, in October of that year. Shirley had been battling dementia and arthritis and was staying at the Lakeview Park Independent Senior Living Community, which is located in Fenton, Missouri. On October 29th of 2013, after a hospital visit, Shirley had spent the night with Pamela. Pamela then dropped her mother off at her apartment at around 5 p.m. on the evening of October 30th. She informed the staff that they shouldn't be expecting her for dinner that evening, nor should they expect to see her for breakfast the next morning. The following day, on October 31st, at around 2:30 p.m., a housekeeper found the deceased body of Shirley Newman lying beneath the balcony of her home. The aluminum balcony railing was also broken. After a police investigation, the assistant medical examiner ruled that Shirley had died from blunt force trauma to the chest resulting from an accidental fall. After the horrific and tragic deaths of her friend and mother, Pamela's only solace was knowing that Betsy's killer was safely behind bars where he couldn't hurt anybody else. Not only had Russ's acquittal taken that solace away from her, it also made her feel unsafe. Since she had been instrumental in securing Russ's conviction for the death of her friend, would he try to seek retribution? If so, when? She felt it was only a matter of time before Russ would make an attempt on her life. After all, he had a violent temper, and he was angry enough at Betsy to take her life upon discovering that he was removed as the beneficiary of her life insurance policy. Since Pamela was the person who replaced him as the beneficiary, it only made sense that she would become a target. On August 16, 2016, after spending some time shopping at thrift stores in the area, Pamela Hupp's fears would come true. Upon pulling into her driveway after her shopping trip, Pamela noticed a man exiting a vehicle outside her home. While still sitting inside her vehicle, the man rushed at Pam with a knife. Luckily, Pam managed to knock the knife out of the man's hand during the struggle to defend her life. She then ran inside her home and called 911. The strange man followed Pam into her house, then up to her bedroom while she was still on the phone with 911. During the 911 call, Pam could be heard pleading for help, while the strange man could be heard in the background asking Pam a question, however it sounded incoherent. Pam then screamed at the guy, "No, I'm not getting into the car with you." Pam then made her way to her nightstand where she kept a Ruger LCR handgun, which she subsequently used to shoot the intruder. Meanwhile, the 911 operator was still on the line. According to Pam, the intruder followed her into the house demanding Russ's money. A document was found on the man that read, "Kidnap Hupp. Get Russ's money from Hupp at her bank. Take Hupp back to her house and get rid of her. Make it look like Russ's wife. Make sure knife sticking out of neck in return for $10,000 reward." $900 and $100 bills was also found on the intruder. 4 of the 9 bills had sequential serial numbers, with another bill found on Pamela's dresser. The intruder's name was Louis Gumpenberger. Immediately following the shooting, Pamela voluntarily went to the O'Fallon Police Department to be interviewed. First, she asked, "Is this going to be filmed? Because I always appear on the news with Chris Hayes." Chris Hayes is a news reporter at KTVI. She then went on to say that she blamed Chris Hayes' reporting for attracting threatening people, before telling her version of the events. Now, this next portion is going to seem a little off topic, however, I promise you that it is very relevant. The person that I'm about to tell you about has yet to be mentioned in this discussion. Her name is Kathy. On August 10th, 2016, Kathy, a field producer for Dateline NBC, was out and about trying to find someone who would be willing to record a simple soundbite for an upcoming episode of Dateline. She was willing to pay $1,000 for a few short minutes of work and didn't think it would even take too long to find somebody who was willing to record this soundbite. Kathy first approached a woman named Carol Alford, who also goes by Carol McAfee, while she was outside of her home. Upon hearing that Kathy was willing to pay $1,000 for a short reenactment, Carol happily agreed. After getting into Kathy's SUV, Carol started to have suspicions, as the deal seemed too good to be true. After stating that she had forgotten something at her house, Kathy reluctantly took her home, after which Carol informed her that she was no longer interested. Her second prospect was Brent Charlatan, whom she spotted mowing lawns that morning in St. Charles County, Missouri. However, Brent would tell her that he was too busy to chat. In fact, he didn't even turn off the mower that he was using to engage in the chat with Kathy. After Brent refused to take part in the reenactment, she decided to look elsewhere. Finally, Kathy happened upon a man named Louis Gumpenberger who was sitting outside his home. Upon being granted the opportunity to make an easy $1,000, Louis happily accepted Kathy's offer. He hopped into Kathy's SUV, and on the way to the site of the reenactment, Kathy and Louis practiced their lines. Upon entering the home, Kathy dialed 911 while Louis read his lines, as they had rehearsed. Kathy then brandished a Ruger LCR handgun, which was kept in the nightstand beside her bed, and fatally shot Louis Gumpenberger. As it would turn out, Kathy was really Pamela Hupp. Cell phone records would later place Pamela practically right outside of Louis's front door less than an hour before his death. This would dispute the claim that she had never met him before he showed up at her house. Also, it would come to light that Louis Gumpenberger had serious physical and mental impairments that would have prevented him from rushing up to Pamela to carry out the attacks as she had initially claimed. Additionally, the new evidence that led to the acquittal of Russ Faria in connection with Betsy's death would implicate Pamela Hupp as the real perpetrator in Betsy's murder. It would appear as though Pamela had lured Louis Gumpenberger to her home under the guise of doing a reenactment for Dateline. Louis was then framed in a murder-for-hire plot to take the heat off of Pamela and to further implicate Russ Faria in his wife's death. Pamela Hupp was arrested for the murder of Louis Gumpenberger on August 23rd of 2016. Upon being arrested, she would ask to use the restroom and would attempt to take her own life by stabbing herself in the neck and wrist with a ballpoint pen. Pamela would go on to take an Alford plea in connection with the murder of Louis Gumpenberger. By taking the Alford plea, she would be held criminally responsible for the crime without having to admit guilt. It would also come to light that the document mentioned earlier that was found on Betsy Faria's laptop was the only document to have an unknown author, indicating that Betsy wasn't the author of that document. When Pamela showed up at Betsy's mother's house to check on her, she did so unannounced and uninvited. She also insisted that she be the one to drive Betsy home, even though she had already made arrangements with Russ. The money from Betsy's life insurance policy had not been put into a trust for Betsy's daughters. In fact, Betsy's daughters would later sue Pamela Hupp for the money from their mother's life insurance policy. On July 12th of 2021, Pamela Hupp was formally charged in the murder of Betsy Faria. The prosecution stated that they will be seeking the death penalty. Also, she is currently being investigated for the death of her mother, Shirley Neumann, and the medical examiner had changed the cause of death from accidental to undetermined. As of the date of this video, Pamela Hupp is currently waiting trial for the murder of Betsy Faria. Okay, so that's going to bring us to the end of this video. Let me know what you guys thought of this case in the comments section. Until next time.